Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. In the last part, we further explored Snowhead, getting ourselves the Goron transformation as well as the Goron's Lullaby in the process. And now that we have both of those tools, we can make our way for the dungeon. You can actually make your way to this area the moment you get the Goron transformation, but without Goron's Lullaby, you're not gonna be able to actually get any further than a certain point. Also, a cool little thing that they do for a lot of the game, if you're on certain materials when you start a Goron roll, you actually start like revving up and skidding a little bit so that you can get the roll going before you hit certain ledges. And thus, welcome to Snowhead proper. You might notice the mysterious blizzard. That blizzard's what's actively blocking us from progressing on up to there. And I don't show it off, but if you use Lens of Truth, there's a Goron there. That's gigantic for some reason. But to get past it, we now need to use the Goron's Lullaby as the Goron in order to progress on here. It's like using the Sonata of Awakening as the Deku Link. We just killed a man, but thankfully there's no proof. So you can maybe get about as far as this second flagpole we just passed before getting blown off by that Goron, barring speedrun tricks. But what's really cool is they actually have a nice winding path to get up into the temple, and you're meant to roll up it, or at least they intend you to be able to, because you can just get through the snowballs, and every snowball drops magic anyway. The control here can be a little rough, though, because even though I think this game does feel a little smoother than Ocarina to control, going this fast, it just isn't a good combination. But if you make it to the top, oh, so close! If you make it up to the top in one smooth go, there's even that little diagonal wall that you're meant to bounce off of, and that's a little bit of a tutorial for something later on in the game with the Goron, but it's something that doesn't really come into play much. I've fallen off this pathway several times, though, even when I'm not rolling. I've had a couple times even where I've hit a snowball with poor timing and just gotten pushed off that way, and yeah, that kind of sucked, but it's mostly on me anyway, so oh well. Time for the dungeon. Welcome to Snowhead Temple. I love this dungeon. This is kind of big. It's gonna take more than average strength to move this thing. Indeed, larger blocks like this, as rare as they are, can only be moved by a Goron Link. There are several cases where there's things that only he can interact with and move just because of their scale. Snowhead Temple is interesting, in that in some regards it's kinda linear in its progression, even compared to some other Zelda dungeons, even compared to Woodfall Temple. But it just makes up for it in having just such a strong core concept to me. Majora's Mask really excels in that in general, though. Like, the weakest dungeon in this game is probably overall Woodfall, but it makes up for it by just being such a strong temple on its own anyway. Also, we've got the first two stray fairies in this room, but that second one I just shot with an arrow up in that little pillar. You can actually only shoot it from where I'm standing just about, because you might notice there's several holes that peer into that little cavity in the pillar. But most of those holes are fake. If you use the Lens of Truth, there's walls there that are hidden, which is actually one of the few times I can think of with the Lens of Truth. They actively hide walls with it rather than hide passageways. That's one of those cases where just having the knowledge ahead of time goes a long way. At slippery places like this, you can curl up as a Goron and roll your way across. Blah, blah, blah. We've had to do this. This is actually one of the many times you have to use ramps. Be careful of the enemies around you, though, because if you get hit by that... Oh, so close. If you get hit by that freezing breath, you do actively get frozen in your path, even if you are in the middle of the roll. So you sort of need to time it, but you don't need to worry too much, because I think the ramp completely takes you past the ladder, too. It's just that one on the left that's kind of troublesome. So, if memory serves on my first playthrough, this was a dungeon that gave me a lot of trouble, arguably the most trouble in the game, Because even though, say, the third dungeon in the game is the most complicated, or the fourth one has a lot more going back and forth, this one makes up for it by just being... I said it's linear, and it is, but its scale seems kind of small in some regards if you just look at the map like we will in a moment. Also, here's an interesting enemy. That's a real bomb shoe. It runs at you with its pack of explosives, so protect yourself or else. The bomb shoe items have an organic form, and they are about as explosive as their item counterparts. But thankfully, you can just shoot them with an arrow and they explode. If they spot you, though, they actively run towards you and explode, so be a little careful with that. Not that it'll do a lot of damage. Enemy damage in this game isn't super worrisome. If anything, the only enemies that can do a lot of damage are usually towards the end game or boss fights. And here's the dungeon map. I've missed this item several times just because I never think to check the corner. So yeah, Snowhead Temple rather. Easily the largest temple in the game in terms of floor count, but you may have noticed all those floors share a room, and there's not many other rooms on each floor outside of that one. That's where the core concept of this temple lies, and coincidentally enough, it's just in the next room. This place is huge. For some reason, I always remember Tattle having a line there. Weird. So this room is the literal central point of the temple, and we're going to be coming back in here several times throughout, but our first duty business is to come down to the bottom of it and step on that switch in the lava. I think you can technically get onto that switch with normal Link, but only Goron Link can actually put the switch down because it's a large switch. And that causes this chest to appear with our next stray fairy. Our first goal here in Snowhead Temple is to find a way to get a key, and as well as get back to the second room in the dungeon because there was a key door there. Thankfully, the key is pretty close by. You just have to go through the only doors you can really open on this floor and pull these double blocks. So something you should do here, and I've had playthroughs where I forget to do this. You want to take this double block and move it to the very far corner of the room. Because then, when you leave the room and come back in later on the road, because you might notice there's a little platform up there, they'll stay there. If you move this block, but not all the way to the far end of it, when you exit the room and re-enter, it respawns in its starting position. And at that point, you're kinda out of luck. Unless you somehow, I guess via messing up and doing something else in this 3-day cycle towards the third day, get a certain mask that will allow you to jump further distances in some regard. But even then, I think that jump might be too far for that to make. Those with good ears out will know what I'm talking about. But behind where those blocks were is our small key. I like to consider that key the closest comparison to the small key in the water temple in Ocarina that's below the one block that raises up when the water level gets raised. And now we got some ice, and we can melt that by using the fire in that particular torch. So that's what, twice we've had to use torches for that? There's not going to be many more times beyond that for reasons. You might notice there's a lot of ice in this temple. We will be able to deal with it later on, but for right now, don't worry too much about it. In fact, also I could say don't worry too much about a stray fairy in this room, because we do have to come back here down the line anyway. Because I'd argue one of the stray fairies in this room are one of the most annoying to get in the game. But also notably, in this room is the next large chest, and following the usual conventions, if we already have the map, you can probably guess what's in here. So something that's worth bringing up about this game's development is Majora's Mask, even in its short development time, went through a lot of changes. For instance, we have evidence in the code due to some sprites that are there stating that at some point in development, the transformation masks were going to have different items for the ocarina that were just outright the drums, the horns, and all that. But they combined them all into the ocarina, presumably just for the sake of not having to worry about redundant item slots or anything like that. And I have to wonder if we ever got like a full-scale remake of some of the earlier Zelda games, like a proper, like, way forward quality remake of Zelda 1 and all that, and we ever got to a point where they just were like, alright, here's a completely reimagined level remake of Majora. If they would do anything with some of those canceled ideas, because I think it'd be interesting to see those come through. So right there's the stray fairy I was talking about a moment ago. you have to actively throw a bomb up at that box and have it explode on time. That is surprisingly hard to do unless you're extremely used to the game. Both in terms of the throw angle, but also just hitting it, because I don't think the blast mask can reach that. Admittedly, there's something you could do to make that a little easier on yourself, and that's if you actively have bought bomb shoes by now at the bomb shop in Clocktown. Because bomb shoes, we don't get them until like the very end of the game. Because you don't really need them before that. But bomb shoes in this game work the same way they did in Ocarina for the bomb shoe bowling. They're bombs you place down and they move forward for a while and then they explode. There's not many times you really need them, which is why I wait on getting them until I absolutely need to. But there are cases where they would make things easier. That is particularly one of them, but there's also a couple of other rooms throughout the game. It'd be just nice to have them just in case for hitting switches a long distance at a way that maybe, say, arrows have a harder time hitting and all that jazz. Roll over here because there's a secret passageway that leads to a chest containing another stray fairy as soon as the camera stops getting stuck on things. Be suspicious in Snowhead Temple if you ever see just little ice fringes on the wall for no reason. Usually if those are there, it's implying there's likely a ledge there you can climb into. Also, I'm grabbing as many rupees as I can because I'm going to need a lot at the end of this temple for something we can buy in the Snowhead area. Also, seeing that we're coming up on the night of the second day, a little theory I've always liked to joke to myself about with Majora's Mask is if you use the Song of Inverted Time, because NPC movements are slowed down, they perceive us as moving faster than everyone else. So to everyone in Clocktown, they're just seeing this little kid in green vibrate super fast and move through the town at inhuman speeds. That's also one of the worst hidden stray fairies in the game. It's just in the ceiling there and you need to know it's there. The Lens of Truth can help you see up there, yes. But I just know where to shoot because I've hit it so many times. And I'm already kind of running low-ish on magic, and I'd rather not waste any right here. So this room's a little interesting in that we got these two pillars that we can smack down with the Goron Pound. It's one of the few times you actively need to use the Goron Pound in the game. But down on the floor below, there's, I think, an infinite spawning amount of the white bows, which are just snow variants of the little dark room spirits we saw back at Woodfall. But you need to get the one that's in front of the door down, and that requires just hitting these things in such a pattern that we actually have our first real timer segment for the game. I'd say by and large, barring maybe one occasion of it, the timers in this game are pretty generous for how much time they give you to do the puzzle, as long as you absorb what's going on in the room pretty quickly. Mind you, my perspective on this game is that I've come from years of playing it over and over again, so I just kind of know what to expect. Watching people play a game like this through for the first time is always interesting, just to see how they absorb the information, see if they can figure out how a dungeon flows together and all that. It's why, even though I don't tend to do them on the channel because commentary flow reasons, I think blind playthroughs are a very valuable thing to have on the internet for games. With that said, time for a face you'll get tired of. Our mini-boss for this dungeon is the Wizrobe. Get your chances right and when it starts to attack. Be on the lookout for it. The Wizrobe will teleport in between these several little platforms on the ground, and when he teleports to one, he'll start casting a spell. Roll over to him and punch him or fire an arrow at him to do damage. At about the halfway point of his health bar, things get a little more complicated though, in that he starts moving very quickly, and he'll then summon fakes at all the other platforms. He's always on one of them still casting a spell, but the others are there to just try to fool you. My best advice for things like this is try to get as many of the platforms on screen as you can, and then roll to the one you see spinning in a circle. He doesn't got a lot of health though, as you can see. Part of that is just because the Goron's Punch is very powerful. Again, it's basically the Megaton Hammer from Ocarina of Time. So I think that makes it about as strong as the Big Goron Sword from memory? And within here lies our dungeon item for this area. We've got the Fire Arrow. Set it to C to power up your arrows. Things will heat up when they hit. So you might have noticed, back in Woodfall Temple, we got the arrow, and now we got the Fire Arrows. This game likes its arrows. Fire arrows, like in Ocarina of Time, you equip them as a separate item. And your arrows now light on fire automatically and can be used to melt ice, torches, and anything at the cost of magic. You will be using these very regularly, because they allow you not only to kill certain enemies slightly faster. Like, I think they do better damage against Freezards if they don't just damage them more outright. Or if they allow you to damage them outright. But they also allow you to access meltable ice switches, not ice switches, which otherwise cannot be activated. Lens of Truth right here because we have another kind of weirdly hidden stray fairy. We need to get up these little invisible platforms. I think I've had like 2 playthroughs where I've made these jumps just out of knowledge of where the platforms are, but for the case of the LP, I didn't want to waste time by falling, so I decided to just bring out the Lens of Truth. Now that we have the fire arrows, though, we want to go back to several rooms from earlier in the dungeon, for instance, the one where we got the first 2 stray fairies, because being able to melt ice means we can now get items in them we couldn't before that are necessary for progression. In fact, you might notice there's one such chest right here. Our goal overall in this room is to take out the 3 Freezards, and you could actively do this, I think, before you have the ice arrows, but you can't get to the chest because it spawns behind the ice. Also, one thing I want to talk about very quickly, part length in this game is a little bit inconsistent. I know like the first 5 are like 30 minutes apart, but I try to shoot for between 20 and 30 on average. I actively had to re-edit some earlier parts to make them not flow better, but make them flow together time-wise better so that the end game wasn't one hour-long video because I didn't want to interrupt things weirdly there. So if there seems like a point where a part just kind of ends weird on the footage side, it's because of that. Because that allowed me to kind of shift things off into their own different videos down the line. Snowhead Temple here is actually one such place. When I was originally editing this, this was all in one video. But for reasons of making the later parts flow better, I needed to split this up into 2, and I think I have to do that for some other dungeons down the line as well. Editing in games like this is always a little tough when it's not outright stage-based games like Mega Man, Mario, and all that, because those give you very frequent, like, good cutoff points, like between this level and that level. Doing it with games that don't have that kind of structure, like Zelda dungeons, means either you're probably doing them all in one video, which is extremely long, and I know people like watching long videos nowadays, but for me, on the editing side, it's just easier to do it in several smaller bursts like this. Especially in terms of render time, because, oh boy. Getting back on topic to what's going on, though. In this room, you don't need to take out the Freezards. You can just ignore them. The Freezards are purely for a stray fairy. Our real goal here is to light the torches with fire arrows. And I think you can theoretically just light the first one of the 3 with a fire arrow and then use a Deku Stick to light the others if you want to save magic. But I don't think I've ever successfully done that, if it's even possible. But that opens up that door over there. And also, if you fall in this room, you are technically in a unique room of the dungeon that leads back to the bottom floor of the central area, but it's not really worth showing off. We now want to press down this switch. This is why the central room is very important, because not only is it the most connective room in the dungeon, but the giant pillar in the center is an active mechanic we have to deal with now. This does limit your mobility on the first 2 floors a little bit, because you can no longer access all, I think, 3 or 4 doors of the first floor from the same room now. If you want to go between them, you either need to use the bottom floor of the first floor, the central room of the bottom floor, there we go, or use the room that we used to get to the switch. But you can always reverse this decision if you need to, for some reason, by going to the bottom of the first floor and pressing the switch down there. There's no real reason to if you've gotten everything we have so far, but there's probably some situations where, like, stray fairies are harder to get or all that. I have distinct memories with this dungeon in one regard, though, in that between the stray fairy that's in that box up there, the stray fairy that was in the hidden little passageway in the ceiling of that one room, and I think the stray fairy I get either last or second to last in this particular LP. I actively had to consult a guide to find those back when, because I couldn't quite figure out where they were. And it's one of the first memories I have of having to actually use, like, GameFAQs or NeoSeeker for anything like that. And there are a couple occasions of that throughout the Zelda period. Like, one that comes to mind is the Twilight Princess statue puzzle, before you get the Master Sword. Another one that comes to mind is the very early game switch pulling puzzle in Phantom Hourglass. I don't know why, that always stumped me when I was little. It's one of the few memories I actively have of when I started looking at guides if I needed to. Like one I also had to have help with, even though I don't think I actually ever finished the game, was Scooby-Doo. I think it was Mystery Mayhem on the GameCube? The game that's sort of a Luigi's Mansion-like, and you need to capture the ghosts in a book. I thought that game was real neat, but I don't think I ever actually finished it. Because if memory serves, it's like either the last area or the second to last area, because I haven't seen the end of the game, obviously, is this lab area. And it's a stealth mission that I could just never figure out how to get through. Maybe if I went back now, I would have the patience to beat it. In fact, maybe I should probably try that at some point. That game was neat, even though navigating it was kind of a pain in the ass. That's why you wanted to move that double block all the way to the end, by the way, because if you came into this room through this way, otherwise, well, you'd have to come back down here and move it, and I've fallen down here anyway. Honestly, thinking about it, I'm kind of glad in gaming that we're kind of starting to lean back towards, like, the more linear set PC-based stuff for some games that, like, was very big during the PS2 era. Because while I like open world games, I think we really got way too oversaturated with them. For perspective's sake, this is being recorded late June. Final Fantasy 16 just came out. I'm about, from my estimates where I think the plot's going, I'd say between the 60 and 70% mark, and I'm just so glad to see that kind of stuff come back. Like, I like open world games, but I would much rather we have either that type of game or a Legend of Zelda type of structured game rather than just outright open world. Open world has a place, but I think we just got too many of them in a row. So, now we're coming up on a part of this dungeon that took me a while to figure out because I just never really thought to try it for a while on the first run. We're coming back to the central room on this floor, and we're equal with the lighter colored portions of the central pillar. You can punch these away. I don't know why I didn't think to do this, because they are distinctly different from the rest of the pillar besides the very top of it, and I guess that's probably why I didn't do it, because I was like, well, clearly, like, the top's like that, so those are just meant to be there. I think that needed a little more signposting, but oh well. So now, because of how I've done things, I need to actually come back down here, worm my way back up, and I'm just going to speed this up to make it a little bit faster. And you may have noticed a moment ago, by the way, Tattle, like, hovered near one portion of the dungeon glowing blue. That involves a song you could have set up by now that's completely optional with the Scarecrow back at the Astral Observatory or General Store in Clocktown. But I'm not messing with that in this 3-day cycle because it's not needed here. If anything, that's just to give you a little shortcut to get around some parts of the game like this. But with that, if memory serves, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 10, we're gonna go finish off the Snowhead Temple and see what awaits us at the top of it. See you guys then.